Welcome to another episode of the Carry Trainer Higher Line podcast. Hey all, welcome to yet another episode of the Carry Trainer Higher Line podcast. Got a friend and special guest on today, Mr. Bryan Eastridge of Oklahoma City PD, retired. Once upon a time Army action guy. Bicycle policeman, maker of belts, and now you're the guy behind a new venture training people in the ancient art of the revolver, the wheel gun. What's up with that?
Man, they're just popular right now. I think everybody's kind of like plastic striker guns have every 10, 15 years that people kind of they kind of lose interest and start exploring other avenues. So
what are those bicycles called with the huge front wheel? I'm going to bring those back, like the ones from like 1900.
The penny farthing.
Yeah, I'm going to bring those back. I'm going to be out on the bike trail being that guy.
Yeah. I actually had the chance to ride one of those once. It was not pleasant.
I bet. I think you're right. I think it's an interesting thing that we just get bored with shit. That's why we buy old cars when we have brand new ones that blow cold air up our butt and have badass stereos. Remember the stereo like in your car when you were a kid? Like my sister and I had a car that we shared a little bit that had like two speakers, AM. It was an AM. That was just AM. There was nothing but AM. And that was it. Yeah. We're kind of spoiled with new cool stuff. We get bored and angry with it though.
Yeah. And the revolver thing, about 2 years ago, I started noticing people were taking a bit of an interest in it. And I kind of just by chance stumbled in, Daryl Bulkey and I kind of ended up doing a lot of training events together and stuff like that and security gigs. And we were just working together all the time. And he and I were both like full tilt revolver nerds. And I had the good fortune with the police department. I came in at an era when there were still a lot of street cops that were carrying revolvers, and our range staff were all pretty schooled up on how to keep them running and maintain them. And I was shooting on their pistol team. So we shot revolvers all the time, custom PPC guns. And they were kind of like race cars, or older cars. You had to learn how to service them and maintain them, and which involved a lot of gunsmith level work. So when Daryl and I kind of joined forces, it was like, okay, all the old training doctrine stuff, and I've got the marksmanship and gunsmithing side covered. So it was just kind of a natural progression, I guess, for us to start the AmericanFightingRevolver.com and all that. So.
And your father, he's an old copper, Gary Eastridge. He's been on the podcast a few times in a bunch of our videos. He's a revolver nerd too. I know he collects them. So you grew up. Oh, excuse me. Coffee? Thank you. Appreciate that. Hand-delivered coffee during the podcast. And I guess if we're going to do that, it just so happens that I'm drinking some Ignis Lux coffee. That was well-timed.
Shameless
plug there, huh?
Good stuff, man.
Teacher fuel. Anyway, so Gary, your pop, total revolver nerd. So you grew up, it'd be like a kid growing up with a dad that loved football or NASCAR or whatever. Your dad was a street cop that was a junkie for old school wheel guns, right?
Yeah. And it kind of went in cycles, during the mag ban era, 94 to 04, we were both real into 1911s and custom 1911s. And, I went to a couple of gunsmithing schools to learn to wrench on those. And it's just like everything else, the hobbies you had when you were a kid or growing up, they all seem to kind of come back around. So we started getting back into vintage wheel guns about 5 years ago. And I mean, I have the good fortune that, he's got effectively a machine shop behind his house. So I get to go over there and wrench on guns and spend some time with him tinkering on guns, repairing them, stuff like that. So
Yeah, and I think that's something people don't know about you. You're not just a pretty face. You are a gunsmith of sorts. You built tons of custom 1911s and revolvers over the years. Talk about that a little bit just before we get into the other stuff, so folks know that you're not just like. It's kind of funny. I'll hear guys say, "Oh, I'm a gunsmith," and like, what do you do? I put sights on guns, or I stipple. Like, it's not. Maybe you're doing some modifications, but that's not gunsmithing.
yeah, I started in 2006. I went up and spent about a week and a half with Bill Lockridge up at Cylinder and Slide in Fremont, Nebraska. And
Arguably, like one of the best builders.
yeah, and I would say he's kind of the second turn of builders. So he's kind of in that lineage between like Armand Swenson and Ted Yost. He's kind of right in that middle ground. So he's got all the modern aesthetic stuff and all the modern methodology for like sight mounts and stuff like that, coupled with he and Armand Swenson were really tight. So there was a lot of that old world craftsmanship that he brings, from the era when there wasn't oversized parts to fit and things like that. And he's probably the premier teacher on that platform. I went up and saw him last year, just on some other business stuff, but he teaches one or two courses a year. And from that, we've seen some gunsmiths that do it full time now that their first adventure was the hobby of, well, I'm going to go build a gun with Bill Lockridge. And, now they're like gun household names. So that was a
There's somebody
fascinating
that you
time.
can think of that is one of those people.
Yeah. So Dan Batchelor from Powder River, yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of where he started out. I mean, I think he had done some work before, but he went through the course about 6 months after I did. And, he's one of the premier parts guys for like Springfield XDs
I
and
was going
some
to
of
say, I
the,
remember Powder River from the XD stuff.
yeah, and he does like some 22 stuff, some 1911 stuff. And I think he's still doing custom shop work too. So, there are guys like that that's the biggest one I can think of offhand. But and then there were a lot of guys that were gunsmiths before that went to his course to kind of get a little different perspective, because you never use a manual machine there, or like an end mill or a lathe. It's all hand work, and it gives you an appreciation for having an end mill and a lathe and things like that to be able to do some of that work a little more expeditiously. But we spent like 9 days just wrenching on these guns by hand, and 10 and 12-hour days some days to get where you needed to be in a project. So
That's cool.
yeah.
Grinding away on them. You did some Army time. You were in the airborne, right? And I believe when you were Ranger qualified. Is that right?
Yeah, I was in the 82nd from 98 to '02. I got hired on the PD right before all the big deployment trains kicked off. And yeah, September of 2000, I graduated Ranger School a year to the day before 9/11. So that was kind of interesting. And then, those crossroads in life, I was, like 9/11 had happened, and everything was kind of on high alert, and the police department had called and said, we have if you can make it here by May, we'll have a conditional job offer for you. I was like, that was a tough decision, to get out right in the middle of that time. But yeah, that, twists and turns of life, I guess. But I started on the police department in September of 2002. And that was an adventure in and of itself.
Tell me some adventures. Tell me how policing changed in the 20 plus years that you worked in a the biggest city in Oklahoma?
Well, the technological slide got massive. Like in the last 5 to 7 years, it's really grown, and some of it's good and some of it's really scary. Um, and when I started, I mean, we had a DOS based mobile data terminal that was just real basic. And then about 10 years through my career, we actually had like tough books in our car, and the capability to data mine things got really uh, exponentially better. And then now it's almost frightening how much information, how much data that the police can pull into a police vehicle now that there's traffic cameras. And I mean, it's getting kind of 1984ish, so to speak, with the ability to harness data really quickly at the individual officer level.
I know a
And
dude that's responsible for a lot of the license plate cameras. He's like involved in pushing that to local and state level agencies to purchase it, and it's like that stuff's kind of freaky. I understand the value of it, but on the flip side, like I just went on a road trip, like people know where I'm at, not just from that tolls and credit cards and all that, but just that single piece of equipment mounted all over little towns.
yeah, and I saw a real dramatic change under the Obama era. The police work was still pretty highly regarded as a noble profession, and there was a lot of public support even in that era. And then when the DOJ with Eric Holder started pushing out all the 21 CP programs and things like that, man, it was like putting handcuffs on police departments, especially municipalities. The sheriff's agencies don't seem to be as prone to some of the agenda type stuff as municipalities do, but that was when I saw a real dramatic change, because I think they passed all that stuff in about 2013, 11, 13, somewhere in there. And then those dollars started getting pumped out to cities and municipalities right in the middle of the Trump era.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, really put the handcuffs on a lot of agencies that, and a lot, and down to the individual officer. I mean, body cameras are a good thing, but they're also a very double-edged sword that a lot of people don't consider. And
Let's have an example of that.
well, when I started, 2000, late 2002, early 2003, let's say you pulled over some kid with a roach in his ashtray, you know,
You
and
mean the tail end of a marijuana cigarette?
yeah, like, just
Okay.
the butt end of a marijuana cigarette. Let's just say hypothetically that dude's buddy was inside the car smoking weed or whatever. And 18-year-old kid, he's not high, he's not drunk, he's not impaired, but you have contraband there, right? Well, in that era, we could do what we call wind testing it, throw it up in the air and go, oh, look, it's just like weed, and then send the kid off with a clean criminal record, maybe a traffic citation or something. But you had the discretion and the discernment to be able to, um, you know, apply the law in ways that were fair, if that makes sense. Instead of nowadays, man, once that stuff's on body camera, it's a done deal. That's sealed up. There, you have no discretion left. And for some people, that, I mean, you know, you're 18, you're still in high school, and you catch a marijuana arrest. Let's look at how, what are the number of jobs you're now ineligible for? And I'm like, you're creating, you're you're handicapping people over, a pretty minor infraction. So that, and traffic stuff, pull somebody over, and okay, they're doing 15 over, and it's all on the body camera, and it's like, now that the tables are turned from me not having to justify anybody why, hey, slow down, take it, get your foot out of the accelerator. Maybe somebody's having a bad day. It took the discretion from that to, well, you better take enforcement action because now it's all documented and it's all public record and it's all searchable. So, it really crippled the discernment factor with patrol cops, especially.
Double-edged sword, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot. I think we could probably spend hours just digging into that, but it definitely goes both ways as well because we've seen body cam footage of cops behaving poorly, badly,
Mm-hmm.
criminally, etc. So, yeah, I think it's if we could just have everybody be nice, we wouldn't need any of it.
Yeah, and some of that, a lot of that, all the people I ever saw in the LE world that had an issue later in a career that wasn't caused by an injury or something, some external factor. Most of the ones I blame it on negligent hiring, a
Hmm.
lot of it, and negligent retention. You see somebody that their moral character is very corrupt, and you see them get passed through the system, and it's like, this guy's going to be a problem. This gal is, there's obviously something in their personal ethical code that is wrong, and we've had examples of it where we identified it, and then something really bad happens, and I see that nationwide, and I think that's going to get worse. Because we're not seeing the recruiting and hiring like we once did,
Hmm.
where when I got hired on, there were something like 1,500 applicants, and they took 55 of us after months of screening. And now I've watched them, scrape to get 10 or 12 that are qualified, maybe. And, that's, and people, I mean, let's face it, people are not just like, they're not like me when you're in kindergarten going, I wish I was 21 so I could go be the police. That was my like whole life's mission. It was like, oh, that's what I want to do. And a lot of that was because my dad, my aunt, and my uncle were all cops. And, um, when you look up to that as a kid, and then you get there, and halfway through your career, the whole profession does a 180-degree turn. It's really kind of devastating.
Hmm. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday. He's a captain on the East Coast. I won't say the state, but he's telling me he was just with city council. They just got new mayor, new city council. So he's going through a bunch of crap. He's number two at the department he's at, and he's got, I think, 90 sworn officers, 100, something like that. And he's got like 10 guys retiring. So he's telling whoever, hey, we've got to, you guys need to get me like whatever, 10 new dudes. And they're like, well, why don't we wait till all those guys are actually done and out processed, and we'll give you, he wanted 20 because he knew some wouldn't stick. Maybe he said 15. But long and the short of it, the city came back and they're like, we're going to wait till all of them are like retired and off the books before we put anybody new on the books because we don't want the extra salaries and the insurances and shit. And he's like, hey, dumb fucks, it's going to take 2 years for us to hire them, train them so that they can go do their job. So he's like, this keeps happening. So his numbers are just keep shrinking and they're not able to replenish, including, like you just said, the people that they're actually getting are dipshits.
Yeah, and I mean, there's exceptions to all of it. I mean, I've met some, when the millennial generation really started to come in strong to law enforcement, I was like, oh dear God. But a lot of them were, GWAT vets, and they had some type of, militaristic infrastructure, or, maybe they were a college athlete and they had some level of, structure that, instead of, well, I went to college for 8 years and you guys were hiring. It's like,
Mm.
so there was a lot more. It was kind of surprising because I really figured it would be meh. And then now I'm seeing this new generation, and they don't look at it like we did, which it was a career. You were going to be there, indefinitely. It was a career, and it was a real drive to go do the job. They just kind of look at it as like, well, this is another stepping stone in my life. And I've watched a lot of them punch out at 10 years, 5 years. And something else, this new generation that's grown up with technology in their hand, uh, they don't look at money the same way we do. They don't look at housing, things like that, and they're way more entrepreneurial than people from my generation. So that's, I mean, it's good, and it's kind of frightening to know, man, they don't look at this as a career anymore. They look
Mm.
at it as this is just one milestone, and until I build my real estate business or whatever.
Sure.
So, and I admire that about it. And they're a little more used to the tech changes within the job and being able to harness it. So I would say that the good ones now are very efficient, and but the good ones are fewer and farther between than they were, in our era, where you lived it, ate it, breathed it every day. So.
Hmm. Which you bring up a good point, entrepreneurialism. You're an entrepreneur. You've got the gun belt business, EDC Belt Co. It looks like you've got your shirt on there. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and now the training business. Talk about that a little bit. How has training evolved in the time that you've been involved in it? Uh, I know I talk about this constantly. You and I are about the same age. We're not that old, but 20 years ago, you couldn't just, one, the internet didn't exist. I was just chatting with a guy, a seventh group, a dude that runs a range and some training down in Florida. I was talking with him this morning, and like, to find a master class shooter, there was like, a couple dudes, kind of like a black belt in jujitsu. I knew a purple belt, and that guy was like Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? And now I got 100 friends that are black belts, and now I know 20, 50 guys that are USPSA GMs because somebody showed this path of how to do it. Talk about that a little bit. Your thoughts on that kind of shit.
Yeah, I mean, I was into martial arts as a kid, and it was very almost counterculture at that time. And then enter the UFC, and that that type of activity started to become really mainstream, right? Around 93, 94. And that's when I was, into jiu-jitsu and judo and things like that. And in my generation, it was very foreign. It was like, ooh, that's what the weird kids do or whatever. And then the
In
UFC
Oklahoma,
really,
you play football or wrestle, damn it.
yeah, and you got ready to go work in the oil field. That was kind of the path a lot of my friends took, um, or the natural gas industry or something like that. Um, but I saw that, like, back then, everything was very very divided. Like, if you went to a judo school and they found out you took a boxing lesson, they'd be like, "Oh, what's that all about?" And then fast forward with the blow up of mixed martial arts there in the early OOs, it was like, now it's kind of mainstream. I mean, you can't go to a
Mhm.
major city and not see some jujitsu school or dojo or whatever. And it's been really the same in the gun world. When I was a kid, you had to, or younger, even when I was in the army, you had to order VHS tapes to
Sure.
watch, Robbie Latham and Todd Jarrett and Koenig and all those guys at one match. You pay like $50 to get a VHS tape of them shooting the Bianchi Cup or something, and you
Hmm.
try to
Hmm.
figure it out from there.
Yeah, what are
And
they
there,
doing?
yeah, and there wasn't very many local clubs.
Read
Uh,
Brian's book, Enos's book.
oh yeah, I I read that one every year, and I've given copies of that book out to friends of mine, and I'm like, look, go take a training class from someone reputable, and then read this book, because if you don't, it's just, not that it's garbled nonsense, but it really requires a high level of thought to understand what
Hmm.
he's talking about a lot. But I go back every year and read it, and I pick up something I had either glossed over, and that was really the first, I'd say, mainstream publication for, uh, how to get really good really in a really timely fashion. So, and if you go back, I mean, you read Fitzgerald's books and things like that. They all kind of say the same thing, but that was the first one that kicked off in the competition shooting world that really
Mhm.
made an impact. Post bullseye era. So, and there's a lot of modern applicability to even some of the older publications, but they're pretty archaic. When you go back and read, some of those books like I mentioned, or Askin's books and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But Enos was really like, here's the modernized minutia. So yeah, and I know a lot of shooters that were like, man, I was an A card or B card shooter, and then I started reading that book from now 1990. I mean, that's been a lifetime ago, and it really revolutionized the way they practice,
Mhm.
the way they approach training. So
I
so that
remember.
that
I remember
that's
the first time reading that and was like, "How high was he when he wrote this book?"
yeah. And if you know anything about the guy, he's a bit of a recluse. He
Yeah, yeah.
just, and I think he kind of had that whole Zen Buddha mastery thing going on, and I think shooting was just the outlet for it, right? Like,
Mhm.
he was the dude definitely thinks on a little different plane than most of us, but if you go back and look in the archives, I mean, Charles Askins was different than us. I mean, he thought on a completely different way than we do. But the training side, it was very similar.
Mhm.
So
Mhm. What? So you started out shooting PPC?
I started in 2001 shooting IDPA,
Okay.
and I had the good fortune of being on the East Coast. And at that time, you had Todd Jarrett, you had Ernest Langdon,
Mhm.
Todd Green, Justin Dial was out there. He and I shot matches together years ago. Didn't even know who each other were, but Super Dave was out there.
Yep.
It was just a real hotbed of high level shooters. A lot of it because of the jobs that were out there. You had the Northern Virginia people, you had the Fort Bragg people, you had a lot of the
Mhm.
SIF guys from the SF teams that were really good handgun shooters. And of course, the week I met Ernest, like a month before, he'd won the IDPA Nationals. So it was like, oh, these these dudes are a big deal. And so I started into that. And then when I got out of the Army, I moved back to Oklahoma, and there was one IDPA club. And I was in like an expert class shooter on, service pistol and custom defense pistol. And I saw a whole lot of qualifier masters that went and shot this, the standard qualifications, and attained a master card. And I'm going, dudes, if you all were out on the East Coast right now, you wouldn't even be middle of the pack.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
and then that club died off. And when I got into police work, the shooting sport of the era was PPC, and that was an adventure, a lot of work, but the skills I learned there served me really well.
What's that
Even
look like for people? Because that sport's not publicized like these others are now. There's nobody shooting PPC videos and posting them up on
right.
Instagram like they are a USPSA match or an IPSC match.
Well, everything's based around a 6-shot revolver, and the bulk of the shooting is at 25 and 50 yards. And when we had a good traveling team, one of the requirements was the 3-position 25-yard line. You better be able to like almost clean it on a 4x6 10 ring. And it's a tough sport because your ammo has to be right, your gun has to be right, and you got one opportunity. That's and it's 150 round course. The 1500 is a 150 round course that shot back to back in individual stages, back to back to back. You might be on the line for an hour and a half, and you know 24 48 rounds out of that 150 are shot at the 50-yard line. under time, seated prone, and then left hand and right hand off a barricade. So it's a very difficult sport. Now, Philip Hemphill and Clay Tippett and some of those guys, they shot 15 perfect 1500s. John Pride shot a few. There's a handful of people that have cleaned that course. That's never been done in a bullseye match, but it's really it's a very mentally intense game, and but it's also the practicality of it isn't like it is with USPSA or IDPA there, but the marksmanship side of it is so high. The degree is so high. Um, you're reading sights at 50 yards, and I can remember being at the Nationals and firing one round and going, something didn't feel right with that, and it ended up being low in the 9 ring. And I went, yep, that one was, the powder charge was a little off. I mean, you get so tuned into your stuff that way. Yeah, it's, and I got in kind of late on it, but that sport's just, I hate to say it, but it's dying a really slow death. And it also, it some parts of it shaped police training, and not really in a good way. Like the target selection. I told people when we trained a PPC centric course, we had a really high hit rate on bad guys because our marksmanship was really high. But we gave a lot of felons colostomy bags because the highest value scoring ring on the target is right in the guts of the target. So, the whole train like you fight thing, it's more like you fight like you've trained. So that was.
Go ahead.
Oh, and my biggest accolade there was, I hold an NRA distinguished badge in PPC, which I'm badge number 740, and I got it in 2007, and I think there's only 860, so 90 guys
that had to shoot really
total.
Well.
Yeah, since the inception of the sport, and they started the distinguished program in 1966.
That's
so
cool.
It's a small club, but when I got it, I got back to work and I was like, hey, look, I got my distinguished. I'm the first guy in the department's history to do this. And they went, cool, there's remedial shooters out there on the 5 lane. So grab a cup of coffee and a jacket. It's cold. Like, that was just another day at the office,
So that's something that like the times I've been around you shooting guns, you shoot really accurately. Is that where all that was built in those days?
Yeah, a lot of it. Yeah. I've always had a weird visual acuity that I can't really describe it to people. We talk about hard front sight focus or target focus, and my eyes work really weird in that, I've never been told shoot with both eyes open. But I can actually see the target in pretty clear focus, and I can also see the front sight in pretty clear focus. And certain types of ammo, like 9mm and 38, usually, if I'm coaching a shooter, I can see the bullets in flight as they're hitting the target, which is, I didn't think it was that big of a deal until I started getting around guys like Wayne Dobbs and Chuck Haggard and Daryl Bolke. They're going, oh, that's kind of a rare thing, I guess. But so yeah, I developed some of it there, but I always had this keen visual ability that even when my eyes, like prescriptions, were kind of getting weird, I still had the ability to shoot really well. And then I really anchored a lot of the, press the trigger, don't move the gun thing. That was really a lot of where the PPC thing came in. So that's kind of where that put that piece of the puzzle together.
A novel idea. Press the trigger.
I wish I would have trademarked. I had the picture of the Dalai Lama, and I made the meme that says "press trigger, no move gun." That is all. I've seen that all over the internet now, and people are like, "Look at this!" I'm like, "Yeah, I did that in 2015. Thanks." Oops, missed a $1 million idea. Oh well.
I think it still get copied. I just saw somebody's shirt the other day that was their logo that looked just like Coca-Cola's. So yes, somebody's gonna steal it. There's that meme of me and Sang, a photographer, took a picture. Sang was shooting, and I'm like going to like touch his butthole. And that one pops up once every year or two with shit, and we're far enough away that people don't know it's us. And I was like, that's me about to touch my friend's butthole. Shoot, copyrighted thing.
Yeah,
I really wasn't touching his beehole. It was just more of a
a caress, a gentle
caress.
caress.
Yeah. So you and Bulky decide we're going to do revolver training. What's that look like? I love revolvers. I find it funny. I look at guys talking about stuff being out of date, and I always joke around with people like bad guys or a heart or a liver or a spine don't care what sent the flying piece of metal into it.
Yeah, it was funny. Bulky and I worked a cross country security gig together. It was just kind of a random, hey, dude, can you be in Dallas at 9 a.m. tomorrow? Because we're getting on a flight at 11 and we're going out here and then we're going to follow this person back here. And I'm like, I'm in. It's like Tuesday. I was off. I said, sure, why not? And I get there and I had an ankle gun. And so I was like, yeah, I said, what should I bring? And he goes, bring a loadout that's California friendly. Okay. So I show up with a revolver, and some low capacity something, like a G48 or something like that. And he's like, okay, cool. What kind of ammo did you bring? And I'm like, wad cutters, and because, you're in California. It's not exactly the most friendly state to, even under Leosa, it's a little dicey. So I was like, there's no question, a 5-shot revolver fits the bill, and this one happens to be on the register, and I'm not shooting hollow point ammo because there's some debate on that out there as to you know is it going to be okay if it goes before Gascon or somebody like that? It's like I don't even want to take the risk with it, and it also on that trip, we started really diving into the revolver stuff. And uh, then he asked me to come and present at Revolver Roundup in 2022. And I was like, okay, I can teach people to shoot revolvers. Um, and then we got contacted on a consulting gig with a manufacturer, like both of us, um, traveled to the deal, and then that spawned into another consulting gig. And I was like, dude, we got to get some business infrastructure behind this. And do you have an idea for a company name? Like, let's join forces on this. And he was kind of in a roundabout way in the process of writing a reference or a coffee table book, like the Vicar's Guide stuff. And he wanted to call it the American Fighting Revolver. And I went, ooh, that's a good company name. If you want to join for, like, I'll set up the business and all that, and we can go do, instead of, what company are y'all with? I'm just some guy from the Midwest. It turned into, okay, you guys have a company named after the product we're trying to develop here. So that's how that started. And the Revolver Roundup was really kind of one of the last places that you could go in mass. And it still is. We do it at Gunsight every year in November, and you could go and do revolver centric training across, pocket guns, mid-sized guns, service guns, the whole gamut. And you had subject matter experts there from every piece of that world. Gunsmith dudes. You had now like Caleb Giddings from Taurus. He's a younger dude that's doing cool competition stuff with revolvers, and then me trying to kind of preserve some of the PPC legacy and pocket snubs, things like that, and get all the training in one place. So we started seeing a bigger demand for it around 2021.
Why should anybody give a shit about a revolver when I can go buy a 43 or a 365 or one of those little guns?
It's a very valid question. What anchored it for me is, if you look in, like, we're going back to body cameras. If you look back at body camera footage now and you start seeing entangled shooting, you start seeing these Wonder Nines just choke. And I don't have enough person behind the gun to make it operate, you know.
So because you're a little older and
Hmm.
you grew up with a father, Wonder Nine was a term used like when
Yeah.
people started getting away from slab side 45s and revolvers to the Glock 17, really, and those
Yeah.
guns that came after it.
Yeah. Your 9mm semi-auto. And the big thing I saw was there were a lot of external factors that either make that gun work or not. And granted, I don't question the reliability of the modern service autos. There's no doubt that they're as good as they've ever been or may ever be. Um, but when you start adding in close contact shooting, entangled grappling, things like that, where you can't always get the perfect setup behind the gun. Now all of a sudden the revolver shines because it's a honey badger. It doesn't care how you hold it. It doesn't have reciprocating mass. So it really pays a lot of benefit there. The other piece of it is, best I can tell, they're 50 state legal.
Mhm.
So if you travel a lot and you want to stay armed in places that you may, well, I don't know if this place has a 10 round capacity or a six or a 5-shot revolver fits the bill for a lot of that stuff. And now, like, having my mom and stepdad, they're, a little older. And I'm like, for me to teach these people the manual of arms on the simplest platform, like a Glock 17, to make sure that it's unloaded or loaded, and they're going to touch it once or twice a year, maybe. A revolver kind of fits the bill there. Press a button, open the cylinder. It's either got shiny brass or it doesn't.
Mhm.
And, for all the people that go, well, it's a training issue. I worked in a range house that I know had 5 holes in it, and that's from professionals that carry guns every day. So that got the whole take the source of ammunition out and then clear the chamber. They got that step out of order, and these are people that literally handle guns every day. So, for somebody that wants to have like a fire extinguisher type gun in their house, I think a revolver fits the bill pretty well.
I
And
love it.
yeah, and my granddad kept a 3-inch nickel J frame in his nightstand the whole, his as long as I knew him. And when I got it, it had a battery of ammunition in it from probably the mid 70s. And I took it out and emptied actually fired the gun. No, he wasn't going to
Man,
go. Yeah. So there's some real benefits there, I think. Um, I'm not arguing that cops should go back to revolvers. I think that's a bad idea. Um, but I think they fit the bill for a lot more people than we've really recognized over the last few years. And, now we have cost effective options that are, like Taurus is making they're making good stuff now. I wouldn't have said that 10 years ago. Um, and we're really kind of at a place where the whole semi-auto service world, I don't know where it goes from here. I don't know how you can make it any better or squeeze any more performance, because we're kind of in a heyday of gun ammunition sighting systems, but a lot of that is complexity that a lot of our gun owning populace doesn't appreciate, or they don't train. They're not going to go to the range every month, or maybe they will at some point. But I think it gives them an option to stay armed that got a relatively safe system. Even the lightest revolver trigger double action is pretty healthy. So I just see a lot of benefit with it, and a lot of benefit towards people that are gun curious. So, I mean, let's face it, the bulk of the people we train, we're talking to like 1% of the gun owners in the world,
mhm,
if
mhm.
that. So,
What was
you know,
what was Eldon's last name from the original leather
El,
slap. What was his name?
Eldon Carl.
Yeah, like he's got that 100-yard target with the 44 that's been all over the internet for years, shooting the Smith and Wesson. Got that 100-yard group with the 44 mag iron sighted gun with ammunition made in 1960, whatever year that was. Like that I don't think people completely understand the capabilities of these tools.
Well, if you think about like semi-auto progression, it wasn't until probably the last 10 years that the gun and ammo combinations in a semi-auto started to rival service ammunition with a revolver. Now, I'm not talking your high-end custom 1911s and things like that, but um, the original Glock, the Gen 1s, Gen 2s, they were service accurate by all stretch, but I can get my Gen 5 G45 and load it with 147 grain ammo and shoot like really close to match grade performance with that out of the box, and that was pretty unheard of until the last few years. And I saw it in the PPC world. Guys were constantly chasing barrel fit and rifling twist in semi-auto guns to try to hold those really super tight groups at 50 yards.
It's kind of
But
like a bolt gun versus a gas or piston
yeah,
driven. Same kind of argument. We're not
yeah, and
even
I mean, we
arguing
didn't see the
dynamics.
revolution. What's that?
I said it's not even an argument. It's just the same mechanical dynamics of a breech that opens up and a barrel that's moving in relationship to the sights.
Yeah, and I mean, look at it's real similar to the AR versus bolt gun thing, the gas versus bolt gun. We didn't see gas gun, gas impingement guns that were outstandingly accurate until, without going to some custom type builder or some secondary vendor. We didn't really see that in mass until the early OOs. And that gun had been around since what, the 50s? It's like, um, but revolvers were always, if they're timed up, they're inherent, and the forcing cone throw barrel lead is cut right. They're just inherently accurate. That's not to say that there's not some dogs out there, but I just think in a mass production type setting, that's they tend to be very accurate out of the box. So
I dig it. Now you guys kind of just worked with Lipsies, you and Daryl, to help create like the holy grail pocket rockets, right? Talk about that little blaster.
yeah. So am I going to get you demonetized or anything if I show it off?
No, I don't have any
Okay.
pants on.
Well, there's that, but that's the gun, and this is the 642 UC. It's the ultimate carry. It's the new hotness right now, and this one I cleared it before we
Move over
started.
this one. Okay.
But effectively, what they did is they took some of the earlier the older Scandium gun componentry, like this two-piece barrel system, and they brought it down to the aluminum frame. Everybody's favorite 442, 642, and then that allowed the ability to put a rear sight dovetailed into the top of the frame and a front sight that's a common height. This is an XS front sight, but they adjusted this deck height that it sets on to regulate the elevation. So there were previous iterations of guns like this that really had a lot of challenges on like ammunition zero. And we went to Lipsies and certified these guns with 135 grain gold dot plus P and 148 wad cutters. And which means the 130 grain military load, the old service ball ammo, shoots really, really close to the sights in these. And we did some other features like the rear sight or the front sight color. The rear sight is a serrated U-notch because everybody needs a U-notch now. And then kind of the magnum opus of this deal was the engineering behind these grips with VZ. And there's another benefit of revolvers. If you don't like these, you're a screwdriver turn away from hundreds of third party options, from different styles to fit your hand. But this frame style is called this Centennial, and it started out in like 1950 ish, and it has like a humpback with an enclosed hammer. And one of the things you get with that is the acceleration of the, what's that?
Bloody.
Yeah, you get the acceleration of the gun in your hand if you get a less than optimal grip, or even if you do get it, that hump right there would kind of bite your hand. So we had VZ develop these stocks to be as thin as they possibly could and still enclose the backstrap, which was impossible until recently. With wood, you can't. It doesn't have the durability, and with rubber, it just erodes under that kind of recoil. So, so that was a big leap that VZ took, and to do that and still make it adaptable to speed loaders. So, yeah, and then they threw in, excuse me, they threw in a lot of little touches, like they actually chamfered the charge holes or the individual chambers to make it easier to get a speed loader in and out of. They enclosed the ejector rod, which is I could take it or leave it, but it is something that people like. They like the aesthetic of seeing that underlug. One of my contributions to the project was the original prototypes had black screws on the stainless gun. It was just because that's what they had when they were building the prototype. And oh no, we're going to put stainless screws in it. I said, no, make that gun stand out in the gun cabinet. The sights are good, but the black accents, black ejector rod, black thumb piece, it just makes it stand out against previous iterations. And then the 442 version is all black, and they ship it with this like black cherry red stock, so it's pretty eye catching. But yeah, it was ironing out all the details in a platform that hadn't really had an update since the 50s. There were minor variances in the really high end scandium guns, but when it came to like the middle of the road everyman gun, they hadn't really done much with that in a long time. So
that's a 5-shatter, but you can also get it chambered in 32.
yeah. So 32 H&R Magnum, which it varies in spiciness, right? Like it is a Magnum rated cartridge, but you can get some of the quote unquote 32 H&R mag is really pleasantly soft in the recoil. Now you can go up to like 120 grain hard cast that's warp 6 and gas checked, and it's like shooting 38 plus P. But the beauty of these is being able to step down to 32 Smith and Wesson long. And I've actually found that ammunition in like a lot of the big box sporting goods stores, like 100 grain S&B wad cutter. And that 100 grain wad cutter is moving 800 feet per second out of there. It'll punch a hole, and you get an extra round. It's 6 shot instead of 5. So I was pretty averse to 32 until this gun came out, and I started really seeing the benefits of it.
Oh, okay. All right. I think so really you guys took this 60-year-old platform and made it more of a fighting man's revolver.
Yeah, and to Lipsey's and Smith and Wesson's credit, I think they kept it at a price point at MSRP that's very budget friendly for all the features you get. MSRP on that's $759, and we know how that works. Some dealers it's going to be a little less. It's like, but that's a really feature laden package for the cost of the gun. It's about $200 more than the 642 or 442, just the stock -1 models. The other thing they were real adamant about was eliminate the side lock. That's a holdover from the 90s.
I didn't see that on there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't have as big of a heartache with the side lock. I just don't think it's very aesthetic. And I've had issues with them in the past where, maybe a part came loose or something because you're adding like six extra pieces in the gun. So, and it's
For those
really
of
kind
you
of an
that don't know
unnecessary
what he's
step.
talking about, for years Smith and Wesson had a little key, like it looked like a little handcuff hole in the side of the gun that you could literally lock the action, so your kid couldn't pick it up and use it, or unauthorized person. But people kind of hated it, like it was an unwanted handcuff from Big Brother on the tool.
And I don't know what the official story. I've heard a lot of different versions on why it happened. Um, it, I don't necessarily think it was as bad as a lot of people made it. There's a lot of really interesting models out there that do have the side lock feature. I just think it's overdue because it just never, the popularity wasn't there, and it was just kind of an afterthought that just ended up in engineering, right?
The silly thing is, if you're gonna make the gun inert, just put a cable lock through it
Put
and
a
you're done. Yeah.
put a cable lock through the cylinder,
Just put a
and
padlock around open the action and put a padlock through it. And
yeah, and that was what a lot of companies went with. I don't know why Smith and Wesson in that era went with that. I mean, Taurus in that era had the keyhole on the hammer that would lock the action, and
Mhm.
they've gotten away from that completely. But that was one of the demands, and they do make 642s and 442s with no lock, as well as some of the higher end scandium guns like the 340 M&P. And when we sat down, like I had a 340 M&P with me, and Daryl had some customized guns, and we laid all these guns out. And Smith and Lipsy's had done the bulk of the heavy lifting at that point with design, engineering, um, and then they brought us in to really fine tune the details, to really like. And Jason Klossner, to his credit, he was like, "Look, I got you down here to consult. I don't want you to tell me all the good stuff about the gun. I want you to tell me where we're falling short, because I don't want to get this gun to the 5 yard line and fumble the ball." And we made some last minute changes on it that they were really expeditious at bringing to market. Um, uh, with the third party vendor, with VZ and with XS, because the XS sight that they sent us, it was kind of a chartreuse green. It was like fishing lure green. And Daryl was like, "Man, make that as ugly lime green, bright as you possibly can." So it's eye catching, one, and it doesn't blend with any clothing that any normal human would wear. Um, and then the stocks, doing that, but they had all the other feature set pretty well done. And then they brought us outsiders in that they knew could shoot revolvers, and said, they gave us just this gamut of ammo, and it's like, "Hey, make sure this hits to the sights. And if there
so
is,
here's the problem with these guns, though. They're not accurate, right? These little guns, you can't shoot shit with a J frame.
I would say mechanically, even the previous iterations were accurate. The problem was the sighting systems were
Mhm.
various degrees of archaic. Um, and about the best iteration they've done kind of in production was the 351C 22 mag, the 340 M&P 357 mag, and the 43C 22. They have a U notch cut into the back of the gutter sight, and then they had a like a high vis ball on the front of the gun.
Mhm.
And this was just an improvement of that by having a sight that you have a little bit of ability to correct some windage if you get something. If you're shooting your favorite pet load and it got, you need to maybe make a minor sight adjustment. And then the rear sight on the 38s, it's sighted to where that green ball is actually in the bottom of the U notch, and you look through it, as opposed to notch and post, top dead center. And what that allows you to do is you have some elevation correction just by the way you see the sights. So, if you're shooting something that's a little faster and it needs to be, that ball doesn't need to touch the very bottom of the sight. But I mean, I watched Justin Dial, who Justin's a good friend and a good mentor. And
Excellent shooter.
exceptional. I watched him run a 6-plate rack with a 32 H&R mag at 50 yards offhand. And he was actually using the sights and shooting groups at 50 yards with the 38 on different places of the steel so he could see how the
Mhm.
different ammunition went. And I'm like, this dude's different. He's wired different, man.
So shooting groups with that
Mm-hmm.
little snub at 50 yards, the gun will do it. And that grip helps you get a better grip on the gun. The sights help you actually align the barrel.
Mm-hmm. And that curvature, that angle right there extends the trigger reach. That was always one of my problems on J's, is if I gripped it two-handed, my trigger finger would get into the web of my support hand and I'd have to do all kinds of weird shuffling on the gun. These feel more like a mid-size service gun, like a K-frame or something like that. But you can still put the boot grips on it if you want, you can put a boot grip on it if it's that big of a deal. But it moves the trigger reach just enough that I don't get into the web of my firing hand or my support hand with it. So
All right, let's change gears a little bit because I don't
yeah.
want to turn this into a Lipsy sales pitch, but I wanted to, so full circle, you and Daryl are teaching people revolver stuff. What's somebody learn? They come to a class, what are they learning? I mean, you put the bullets into the little holes, you close it, you shoot the gun.
Well,
Class done.
yeah, right. I wish it was that simple. Um, a lot of marksmanship stuff. I do the marksmanship side um, more. That's kind of my wheelhouse when Daryl and I work together is, just I my teaching ability, my strong suit is being able to watch somebody the way they manipulate the gun or the trigger and get them tuned in with it. And with a revolver, it's different. I've heard the example. Well, it's like paddling a canoe. You don't just stick the paddle in and try to rush the paddle backwards. It's a roll, right? And there's some degree of truth to that. However, you can shoot these very expeditiously if you understand the trigger dynamics, and that's a big difference that we've lost in shooting modern striker fired guns, where there's a staging point, and we break through the wall or whatever you want to call it. And on a revolver, there's no wall; it's just all roll. So doing that, we spend a lot of time doing that. And the other really cool feature of training people on revolvers is I can have them put one round in a cylinder and close it and get as many dry presses as they get until they hit a live round. So you can iron out a lot of marksmanship issues without having to use dummy ammunition or, stop and break your grip down on the gun and recycle the gun or reset it. So we do a lot of that. And then a lot of it is based on how to keep the gun fed. So there's a lot of similarity with shotguns, right? Once you start shooting, it's all about keeping the gun loaded and keeping it in a fight. And there's a lot of different techniques for that. So we spend the better part of a half day on, finding reloading techniques with different types of loading devices, up to and including loading loose rounds out of your pocket to get the gun topped off. And then different speed loader designs, because they're not all equal. And some that work for one guy may not work for another. Speed strips, there's technique to actually ripping the ammo off of a speed strip and doing it under some degree of, duress or with some degree of haste. So that, and then I go over a lot of the maintenance stuff as well on, hey, if you're going to shoot these and you're going to train with them, it's just like any other gun. You got to understand the system enough to be able to identify if something goes wrong with it. How do I correct it? And some of that can be as simple as like carry a screwdriver. If you're going to train with this, carry a screwdriver that fits all the screws, because they have a tendency to back out. Understanding the nuances of the gun. So, our bread and butter is about a 2-day class, and it's marksmanship heavy day one. It's manipulations and maintenance day two.
I dig it. How do people find you to get into one of those classes?
Well, we have AmericanFightingRevolver.com, and it's a paywall subscription website that is effectively an online magazine where we do video and print articles that are, historically based and modern. So, and we cover every, Ruger, Taurus, Smith and Wesson, Colt, things like that. But we have a newsletter feature on there that you don't have to pay the $5 a month per subscription, and it'll keep you abreast of where we're at and upcoming classes. The other piece is, all the social media stuff. We're at AFR official. So we shortened it up for social media, but AmericanFightingRevolver.com. And that's the landing page. And if you go to the latest post section, that's where our like magazine article kind of content is. And we put out some free ones from time to time, free information on like the Lipsy's UC project. We didn't put that behind the paywall. It's you can access it right there on the site and kind of go through the articles. And we also share articles from people like Michael Bain and Rich Grassy and Jeff Hoover. If there's a public article out there that we feel like pertains to the American Fighting Revolver, we'll share it on that site as well. So it's just hyperlinked to it.
You guys had some issues where one of the social media feeds nuked you recently, didn't you?
Yes, it was actually Patreon, and that was a real good learning experience to have happen in the first month of launching a company, as opposed to the 10th year. I would have been devastating if it had happened then, but yeah, Patreon. There is something in the algorithms with, and I don't know whether it's with Lipsy's or SHOT Show or what, but where anytime we shared a bunch of the Lipsy's links publicly on Patreon, and they locked us completely out of the account. There was no YouTube, you've got a community violation, you got a strike, we're going to demonetize you. You can't say that. They just completely just done.
Scary times with this kind of. Dude, I posted a picture recently. A kid at class shot something in the berm he shouldn't have. None of us saw it. Found out later it was some buried concrete in the berm that had been covered by dirt. Mm-hmm. Little piece of brass came back, gave him about a 1-inch cut on his arm. So all you see is a picture of a forearm with a 1-inch gash, a little bit of blood, right? I talk about what happened, kind of a little discussion about like inspect the burn before you shoot, right?
Absolutely.
And it got removed for graphic violations. And man, I see pictures of women with their full breast exposed, dudes doing all manner of crazy, violent shit. People crashing cars, burning, dying. Lots of sexually explicit material, but like one little 1-inch cut, it's bizarre. It's most definitely biased censorship.
Yeah, I had to exchange some like rather legal threatening emails to get that content recovered. And it was interesting to me to see they were like, what their violation was, you're assisting in the trafficking of regulated goods. And I went, well, there's 500 marijuana grow channels on Patreon. Is that not a regulated good? There's, how to home brew. Is that not a regulated good? Like, if I want to be a brony and dress up like a My Little Pony, whatever, who cares? But they completely deplatformed it. And where we finally were able to recover it was, on intellectual property and trademark. Luckily, we had the trademark on our logo. And that was one of the things that ultimately they said, all right, we'll let you back in for 72 hours to get your content back. So it was, and it was a kick in the knackers, but at the same time, I'm glad that we're not beholden to them now.
Mm-hmm.
And and we've recovered, with subscribers. Thankfully, the gun world is very understanding of things like that, and we recovered all and then some of. I think there were people that subscribed to the page just because they were angry at Patreon, and I wasn't. Daryl and I's page wasn't the only one that got nuked for some reason at SHOT Show. I mean, there was a lot of chatter behind the scenes of, "Hey, man, they just deplatformed me," and I had 5,000 subscribers at $3 a month, and they just killed it. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
mm-hmm,
I just saw Matt Little. I don't know
mm-hmm,
which platform, but Matt Little just got something happen to him. I've had uh, PayPal froze our account. People ask, well, why do you use that? And there's a million reasons, which is not the topic of the discussion,
yeah,
but um, that's happened. YouTube has demonetized us. And the funny thing is, Drew has always been super careful that we don't have any strikes. But YouTube never said that we violated any of their policies. They just decided, hey, you're making thousands of dollars a month for this content that you pour a bunch of energy into. Now you're not going to, and of course the advertisers have a say so in that shit as well. But yeah, this idea. I just was reading the information today about the Justice Department looking for using search topics like the Bible as a means of tracking people as potential domestic terrorists, as the Bible or Cabela's, shopping at Cabela's, or like hell, you buy some fishing lures, you get some buzz baits, you're
yeah.
now you're
Get a
now on the
knock on the door. That
terror watch list.
and that's I don't like to, I'm pretty apolitical. I think they're all, for the most part, most of the politicians I've ever known or met or had any interaction with were not there for the reasons that they advertised. Um, they were not public servants to serve the
Sure.
public. And
Sure.
uh, however, I one of the things I saw that, regardless of if you're left or right or center, who cares? Um, the big thing is when you look at the Justice Department, and the president may not have a whole lot of say over anything when it comes to making law or writing some law or some policy. It's basically done by committee, right, with the House and the Senate. But they can install nefarious people in places in government that can drive money to sway their will. And I saw that with 21st century policing, police executive research forum. And then I the Obama thing, everybody was up in arms when Obama got elected, and I'm like, well, we're due for a Democrat, whatever. But my first in service back after the election, I go set in through a mandatory Homeland Security update. And all the messaging up until that point was like, hey, these are terror threats nationwide. And it's typically coming from countries that are unfriendly. That I won't name any of them, um, but they were all across the ocean, on the African continent and some other and places like that. And it was like, hey, these are what we look for when we're trying to identify, is this person here with nefarious intent? Like, they overstayed a student visa by 5 years, and they have an income stream that nobody like, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I can't remember her name, that when the new attorney general that was appointed under Obama, the first mass law enforcement mandatory Homeland Security, keep your funding for your agency training that we got. What we look for in a terrorist is, do they have a copy of the Constitution in their vehicle? Are they, white male, ages this to this, with, and I'm going, holy shit, everybody in here is a terrorist. Like,
Mhm.
and it was really weird because I thought to myself, I was like, as a policeman, part of your oath is to uphold the laws of the state, local, federal, and the Constitution. Like, you are a defender of people's, you know, civil rights as much as you are uh, an enforcer of law and policy. So that was really scary. And I think that was '08 or '09, early '09. I was like, the whole world just flipped upside down right here. And regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, when you look at the appointments that some of those people make, they can make direct impact right now. And we saw that during the pandemic. People don't pay attention to local government until they go, you can't operate your business, but the bar over there can. Yeah. So that's, and social media, all these things, I get it. They're privately owned platforms, whatever. If you don't like it, take it somewhere else. And we've decided we're going to nuke our YouTube channel and go all to Rumble. Um, and really try to drive that because they seem to be pretty friendly. Unfortunately, Instagram and Facebook are the two really prevalent social media platforms for gun people, um, that are getting less and less friendly. So
It's scary times, which I think the kind of full circle, the whole discussion point about learning how to use firearms to protect yourself, because that is why we're all doing this.
mhm.
We've got some. I just saw a video coming out of Chicago, a bunch of young punks waving guns at people driving by just to do it, like for no. I mean, there's never a good reason to do that, but there wasn't even like an understandable reason. It wasn't gang violence. It was just let me point my gun at motorists driving by. Imagine like 20 years ago if they had that happened. So not only the response of law enforcement or local government, but the response of the public would be, what the hell are we allowing? And now it's, you just scroll to the next absurd thing and shake your head.
Yeah, and I said this years ago, and you may have been there, but somebody asked, like, we were at a conference or something, and somebody said, well, you should just call the police. And I was like, hey, when seconds count, we're only minutes away. you know
Yeah.
and and right now, the policing of the nation, the nation's law enforcement has taken such a beating. um After the 2020 riots, I was like, what do you mean? Like, I got to see a microcosm of it. What do you mean you're blaming the police for inciting this? Like, I didn't see the police lighting vans on fire downtown down the street from my house, but um, so if your default is I'm just going to wait for the authorities, you're severely naive. Uh, I mean, I worked.
Additional part of that that's scary, though, is oftentimes in this day and age, a good person trying to protect themselves, well, forget good, just a person trying to defend themselves, oftentimes is now looked at. We automatically say, why didn't they wait for the police? I say we as in society, and then it becomes, look, they took matters into their own hands. They shot those young boys. They were just good boys that were wayward. Or like what happened in Missouri with that husband and wife when the people were threatening to burn their home down. McCluskey's, was that his name?
Yeah,
I mean, I've asked people, and they're like, well, what would you have done? I go, well, just imagine that outside your house is people, not two dudes, not eight dudes, but like a mob of people threatening to burn your home to the ground. And there was no line of cops there to break it up. It was them. Like, what would you possibly do? And I'm not suggesting that their response that was recorded was what I would have done, but like, what would you do? You just sit there and just be like, all right, let me know when you light it on fire so I can run out the back door. Like, at what point are we not allowed to protect our stuff and of course, ourselves?
yeah, and that's been a real scary change. And all I'll say is follow the money. Because I mean, I watched it. I had a front row seat One of the things a lot of people don't get about the law enforcement world is the federal government's funding programs. Hey, you want to qualify for a $2 million grant to improve your range facility, or hey, your fleet of cars is looking a little bad, so how about you apply for this government grant to get. Well, here's the caveat: now you have to follow all these training protocols, and some of those are written by people that are not acting in your best interests. Um, and like I say, the county sheriffs seem to be a little more insulated from that, uh, but yeah, with municipal policing, it's it's not good. And I don't know what it's going to take to flip it the other direction. If you go back and you look at the cycles of history, um, we're kind of in that like post Vietnam era again.
Mm.
I think is kind of like societally how people are thinking. But they're not hiring the Vietnam vets to do the policing anymore. And I got that from Daryl Bulkey. He's a pretty deep thinker on a lot of that stuff. And there's just these turns and turns. It's the same as trending with guns, right? 30 years ago, the 1911 was dead. Now all of a sudden, cops are putting plastic wide body 1911s in their holsters again. It's like, there's these cyclical turns, and they happen every 10 to 15 years. You'll see something like that, which and I see that in the law enforcement world now. And I got to say, I'm really concerned about it because, I mean, it was my profession for 21 years, and just to see how far it's degraded is concerning. And that's not everywhere.
Good that's come from all of this upheaval. Like I do think in a lot of ways, policing in many areas grew from what its charter was. Historically, we didn't have cops in our colonies. The citizenry did actually historically we didn't. It was outlawed to have armed men in the community that were like hired by government. It was the exact opposite, and then that stuff changed post Civil War, really, where it became what it is today. And I did some work with a police agency going through some books for government procured items that were
Yeah.
procured and they disappeared, which there was an investigation I had nothing to do with, but I was just helping some record keeping. Some of the equipment was like, why does a little police department have a deuce and a half truck? Not that they couldn't use it for something, but like, why wasn't that resource used by a highway department or, whatever, something that it would make sense? And of course, the weaponry, some of the weapons, 50 cals and stuff like that, we could like argue, well, what if? But then, like, is that really, shouldn't that stuff be at some National Guard unit or somewhere where they're actually, if the thing's functioning, why does a little PD need some of that stuff? I think there is definitely like the light has been shed on some bad practices and things that, like, where there was a creep in the original charter of law enforcement.
Yeah, and I've seen like the military equipment. There's a DRMO is
Mm-hmm.
the big one, and it's to try to bolster some of the departments that don't have budgets for things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I worked in a really well funded agency. I mean, we didn't have to go get the surplus MRAPs. We had Bearcats, right?
Sure.
And and now in a large metro agency, I can tell you, having been on the receiving end of gunfire, I would have really liked to have been in a Bearcat when that happened, right? But um, because the bullet doesn't care what it hits, right? I mean, whether they knew we were there or not. But point being, there's got to be some checks and balances with it. And I've seen examples of that, and it seems to be on the smaller communities that you'll get enticed by that government dollar of, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I can give all my guys MP5 submachine guns. What could
Right.
possibly go wrong?
And I'm not
Uh,
against that stuff being used. It should be, but I think that there was definitely some years where, and you know this, if you
mhm,
were the little police chief in anywhere town USA, pretty much you did what you wanted to do because there was
mhm.
just nothing, there was no mechanism to illuminate those uh,
Yeah.
or bad judgment. There was no way. I mean, what are you going to do? The local judge. It was like that movie with Dan Aykroyd where he had the dick nose. Remember, was it
Oh, nothing but trouble.
Nothing But Trouble? Right, right, right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Like,
and I've seen countless examples of that. And then I've seen where the opposite, um, those pendulums swing back and forth. And, it's funny how a lot of the policymakers and decision makers, these things don't affect them. But when they do, all of a sudden the pendulum swings completely the other direction.
mm,
And I've seen examples of that in police work. We had a really really restrictive pursuit policy at one time, and then now it's even worse than it was then. But the original proposal, and then we had a deputy chief get hit and a car take off, and it's like, oh well, now that it affects me, now we can go do this. Um, we had a a mentally ill person that was vandalizing police officers' cars in the parking lot, and oh well, just make a police report and call your insurance, and then write the guy a ticket and send him on his way because we don't want to put him in jail. And then a deputy chief gets her window shattered. Go get the handcuffs and the pepper spray and get this person off my. So I really think some of it happened. Some of those pendulums don't swing because it never affects the people that really make those decisions. And
sure. Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I've seen examples of that, and there's no perfect answer to any of it. I had a guy tell me one time, really early in my career, we were at like an in-service training, and he said, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all of those things are an absolute hindrance to being in the law enforcement world. I went, I never really looked at it like that. He goes, but they're necessary because if you want the perfect example of what it looks like when those things don't exist, you've got, Nazi Germany,
So
1933. That's
rough.
what
Yeah,
that's the,
yeah, yeah.
so you get one or the other, you don't get both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've started to see a lot of those things get eroded through, third party vendors. That was one of the things that really made me like decide to take the pension and leave was, I started seeing law getting circumvented by third party vendors. And
You look at the companies
well,
making body cams and look at the lobbying that they're doing in those. It's just like the drug companies, the way that they're pushing policy, and now all of a sudden the one company making this stuff or the two companies making this stuff have billions and billions of dollars coming in. It's the same as the stuff that TSA uses every day gets pushed on the general public, and we pay for it. We gladly
well,
pay
and
for it.
I just, in police work, there are laws and rules governing data storage.
Mm,
If I'm contacted by the police for any reason, they can, if there's no actionable anything on it, they can only hold my records for, in their system and server for in government archives for so long before they have to be purged. Um, you know, but if I'm the government and I don't hold it, but I contract with this vendor over here, and I said, well, you guys store all that data. Yeah, so we're not keeping it. We purged it from our system. We just gave it to all these, cloud hosting. That stuff started to kind of really bother me, and the older I got, the more I was like, when I came up as a policeman, you took care of the good people and you took care of the bad people, and there was very different methodology for the two. Um, the people that were preying on society, your job was to go out, encounter them, and remove them from society. That was, I mean, that's just the basics of it, right?
Mhm.
And then the people that were victimized, you were there to essentially bring order to their chaos. Whether their house got broken into, or they were victimized in a violent crime, was you tried to bring the best semblance of order to their chaos. And now it's turned into this like robotic, well, in the event of X, do this. It's Did you ever see oh the movie with Stallone and Wesley Snipes, Demolition Man?
Just talk about it, man. That's like I just saw something yesterday. I'm like, this sounds like Demolition Man. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that they had the batons that were kind of like the tasers. I was like, look, they have the magic electric pistol, as my buddy Chuck Haggard calls it. And they're literally standing there waiting for instructions for AI to oh, in the event of this, please ask the subject in a calm voice. And I saw an example of that working the state fair this last year. I watched 6 rookie cops stand around a bad guy that had just had a gun taken off of him and go, "What manual do we need to?" And I'm like, dudes,
Hold him
somebody,
down and put some
yeah, like
handcuffs on him.
somebody put bracelets on him, man. Like somebody. Um, it was staggering to think that, and um, yeah, it just I hate to sound like I'm negative towards law enforcement. I'm not. I mean, they are necessary. Like, I'm retired now. I don't have to fix other people's problems. But if we're not preparing this new generation to be able to sort out other people's problems, they just spawn into more problems, right? And and now that I'm a citizen, I take that way more seriously than I did when I was on the job. Um,
You've always been a citizen.
Yeah, yeah, but there was also the caveat of some duty to act, right? Um, we always used to say it's better to be a live witness than a dead hero, but there's a time to get it. There's a time that you need to step in, and now I don't have that obligation anymore. Those problems over there are somebody else's problem; they're not mine. Um, and taking that mentality of, as long as the problems stay over there and they don't affect me or my loved ones, I don't have a call to action. I'm not willing to, make my kid or my kids or my future wife. I'm not willing to make her a widow over, you know, somebody else's kids. Sorry.
Sure, sure.
When I was on the job, that was part of the deal. It's like, you're going to step in the gap. You're going to stand in the gap for those people, and you accept that as the norm. And when you get away from it, yeah, you're a citizen. You're maybe a little more highly keyed up or tuned in citizen to like behaviors and awarenesses and things like that. But and I don't, if I think something's going bad, under no obligation to stay around anymore. I just hope the people that have to fix those problems have all the tools they need and all the support they need. It's a real misnomer in with training in police departments that police departments train you because they want you to go out and do the best. And it's like, no, they train you the minimum so that they can use that same training to drive the bus over you when things go wrong. So it's, and I don't see that, like I said, I don't see that as much with the counties as I do the municipalities, but
And it's
um,
horrible to think about.
it
That's
is. And
I, I say it constantly. This is a we the people problem. It's not a
it
police
is.
chief. It's not a mayor. We allow these things to happen. There's a mayor right in Dalton, Illinois, right now. Today is the first day of March 24. I don't know if she's been arrested yet, but she will be. I don't have any like inside knowledge, but this chick literally is using the police force as private security. So she's taken most of the cops off the street. They follow her around because she's created like a social media persona around herself. She spent millions of dollars on travel. Like, it's just a matter of time before they line it all up and they indict her and she gets locked up. But like that type of stuff, the citizens allowed for the trustees and the village have not been able to see the book. She literally took the credit cards and checkbook away from the village clerk and the other folks that have mandates to do and look at those things. I just use that as an example. That stuff's like all our problem. Like city of Chicago, or I'm sorry, the schools of Chicago just signed an order that no CPD police officers will be hired to work in the schools. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Okay, fine. So go find private security or whatever. Like, we are doing these things. That's just bizarre.
We are, and somebody asked me right before I retired because man, I was in a bad headspace when I left, just because I was seeing how bad things were really getting on the inside. It was like, man, I'm watching people get disciplined over how they drove a car in a pursuit when there was no negative outcome. It was just, this kid doing what he was trained to do. And they said, what do you think will change this? And I said, well, when it costs more to bury you than it does to train you, you'll start seeing the pendulum shift. Um, that's just the cold reality of it is, it literally costs more money to train a proficient cop than it does to bury him. And uh, that's something that I was naive to the first like 12 years of my career. And then I had a conversation with a retiree that was saying that, and I was like, man, you're blowing smoke. And he's like, no, this is a societal problem that nobody's willing to look at. Um, it costs more for them man hours and equipment and time to train you than it does for work comp and the federal government fund, the officer down memorial fund to plant you in the ground and give your widow some dollars to go on with. Pretty sad state of affairs. And a lot of society doesn't understand that the more dollars that you spend on making quality policemen and policewomen, there's an inverse effect, where officer involved shootings drop, use of force incidents drop, lawsuits drop, pursuits go down. Just by it's kind of like the adage of, we say, if you train with your pistol or your self-defense item, whatever it is, if you train to master that, the chances of you having to use it drop dramatically, right? Because you have a command of knowledge and competency with something, so you're able to make better decisions that don't just default to, I'm going to introduce a gun into this problem. It's like, and I saw the same with police work. Your dudes that were keyed up, good gun guy shooters that were on the razor's edge of training all the time, that never got into shootings. Rarely. Never got into officer involved. She was like, I've got the easy button in my hand. Like, I can do all this other stuff because this is the final tool. Whereas you see people that aren't proficient go into panic and the cycle of, oh, I'm losing options and now I've got to go to guns. So I was blessed in a 21-year career. The only thing I ever had to shoot was a dog. But there were many, many, many times I was faced with, okay, is it time to press the easy button? Because to me, that was not the mechanics of doing that were not difficult. Like, I have a full human silhouette at 6 yards. Ring the bell, hit the timer. That's not a and I was always, and still today, I'm one of these people that I have like no moral aversion to having to do that. It's and I've seen people that did and didn't know they did, but I don't have any heartache with it, and it's part of society. It goes all the way back to Cain and Abel, right? Like, so, but having that level of proficiency saved more people, more suspects.
I
Um,
remember uh, Moss talking about that one time. I heard, what the heck was his name? My brain is mush from too many miles on the road.
Cirillo.
Yeah, him as well, but he did some shooting. Um, oh my gosh, great shooter, Colorado, just deceased 4 years ago.
Mm. Yeah,
Uh,
name escapes me right now.
Haley adopted his training methodology. Oh my gosh, I feel terrible. I can't think of his name. It's just,
Somebody will post it in the comments, be like, "You idiots."
yeah, for real. But he talked about that. He said, I'm fortunate that I haven't had to shoot people because I had so many other tools that I was able to think. Not that I think what you're saying is that you were also never forced into a position where you had to either. Somebody wasn't shooting at you as you came out of the donut shop, most likely.
Yeah, but it would have been a convenience store, but no, I actually had a really interesting one about like I was on medical leave before I retired. I don't know if you remember the Guardian conference when I was limping
Mm-hmm,
around so bad.
mm-hmm.
So I took several months off to kind of recoup from that injury and decided I didn't want to go back. And there had been an incident about 2009. This young man had gone, just had a mental episode and shot up all these cars in a parking lot. And they rang the bell. One of my good friends was negotiating with him, and he had a gun under his chin, and he's, "Don't come any close." The atypical, "I'm going to shoot myself if you know." And my mentality at that point was, I'm not going to shoot this guy to keep him from shooting himself.
Mm-hmm.
That makes no sense to me. And I happened to be one of the few rifle operators at the time, so I was part of the rifle program and instructor program, and I get there, and my old partner holsters his gun while he's negotiating with the guy, and it kind of like calmed the situation down. And at the end of it, he calls me and he's pretty emotional. He's like, "Dude, I know your skill level, and I knew like I was not going to be in a good position with a handgun anyway. And I have enough trust in your skills and capabilities that I knew that you would have instantly rectified the situation if it needed to be." I was like, I never thought of it that way. Or I was just like, "Hey, it's another call. It's hot. I'm on the pavement, laying in a rollover prone, trying to talk some guy off the ledge." And years later, I run into that guy, and he's like the manager of a pretty large, uh, like eatery, right? And both of us, me and my old partner, had been there. And he walks up and he goes, "Hey, are you Officer Eastridge?" And I'm like reaching under the table, like get my hand on a gun. I don't know where this is going. And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Man, I owe you a really big thank you, and I owe your old partner Frank a really big thanks. You guys saved my life." And I'm like, "Okay." So now like my spidey senses kind of dropped, and I was thinking, "Yeah, maybe we pulled him out of a car or something." And he's like, "No, I was the guy that shot up that parking lot." And he said, "I was fully intent on pointing a gun at one of you guys and making you shoot me." And he's like, and he goes through like this whole his side of that incident. And he's going, "I saw so and so holster his gun. And I thought, well, that guy's not going to shoot me." And he said, "And then I saw you out of the corner of my eye. And I was like, oh, I better go talk to this guy. I'm having second thoughts." Right. Uh, and he said, "Nobody body slammed me. Nobody kicked me. Like, hey, throw the gun down. We'll handcuff you and go on about our day." And I was like, "Thanks, dude. Glad." And he's like, "Yeah, man, I'm married. I got two kids. Uh, I haven't had a mental break like that ever." And he said, "I don't even know what brought that on. It was just a day. It was like something broke. And I think about that, and I go, I had every opportunity multiple times that I would have been free and clear, and people patting me on the back and saying, 'Good job,' just to end that cat's life, you know, and because of all the proficiency, all the training, all of the putting in the extra work that the PD didn't pay for, save that dude's life. So yeah. And I mean, that's not me like breaking my arm, patting myself on the back or anything. It's just,
You recognize what happened that day.
yeah. And, I've had several of those over the years where, and I mean, there's half a dozen of them or so, but where I go, if I had been brand new rookie, panicked, didn't have the level, didn't have a dad that was like, dude, master your gun, master your skill sets with that gun, like study it like it's a PhD, so that you never have to get into that situation unless you absolutely had to. If I hadn't had that kind of coaching and encouragement and people not thinking I'm weird when it's like, well, time to go to the range, got to get a workout in, because I see in law enforcement, I see those guys are the weird guys, right? Oh, you're not studying your traffic safety manual. It's like, no, man, we're gonna go put a workout in, right? And had it not been for that, like how many lives would that have cost? How much of my sanity would that have cost to have to end another human being? Right. So yeah, I took it seriously. And I think that's lost in a lot. There's fewer of us like that now than there was when I started in law enforcement, you
Mhm.
know, and that frightens me, man. Like I wish I could have made a carbon copy of myself. The command probably didn't, but of like the knowledge base that I had to just like go, hey, this, like the shooting part's easy, man. It's all the stuff going on around it. And if your shooting part sucks and it takes up too much of your mental bandwidth, you're going to suck at the other stuff.
I
So,
see the same thing in open hand stuff, things that guys start fist bump or chest bumping, and like uh, if you train a lot, I've been in multiple physical altercations in my
mhm.
young adult life. We were in DC a couple months ago for the wreath laying ceremony. Come out of a beautiful steakhouse in Georgetown, and it's cold. As soon as we walk out, I'm holding the door for the ladies. Some freaking shirtless lunatic comes running at us. And my friend Derek, who's a jujitsu brown belt, national champion, maybe even a world champion, uh, his back is to me, and his back is to the dude. I'm like, turn around. So he like spins right as this guy's like 4 feet on us, and he's out of his mind. Pull a knife,
Mhm.
punch me, shoot me. Like he's just saying off the wall shit. The girls get in the car. We kept our distance, and I got pepper spray, I got a blade, I got a gun, and I just want to get in the car and go. I don't want to have to talk to the DC police that we just shot some lunatic. And he wanted it, man. He's chasing us. And I'm like, I can kick this guy in the chest. I can see his hands, I see his belt line. And I'm not like, again, I think to your point, because I knew I could grab this guy by one leg and sit him on his butt. I can do an ankle pick on him. I could blast him in the face with a right hook that he won't see coming.
Like
Like it
I
was
can
like
put him to
10
sleep.
seconds of that. Yeah. And Derek and I got in the car and we drove away and we were laughing about it. But that shit happens. Now on the flip side, that's not hubris. I don't think I can beat everybody up because I know guys that don't look like much that will beat my ass. But you also like know, okay, in this situation, this guy's body language, I can see, I can do these things. And if I wanted to, I probably could have just two hand shoved him, and he stunk. He's shirtless and it's 30 degrees. That tells me enough about his mental capacity that I don't want to be like, I want to call him names. And I said, Jesus loves you, buddy. Merry Christmas. Have a good night. And jumped in the car and drove away. He was probably looking to start something so he could end up in the back of a cop car and go get warm and get fed, is what I was thinking. Ron Avery was the guy's
Yeah.
name I was thinking of it. Ron used to call competition. He called it bloodless combat. And I remember him telling me one time, and if you guys don't know who Ron was, look him up. I feel horrible that his name eluded me for a moment. Ron was one of the early IPSC greats and was one of the top shooters in the 80s and 90s. And a lot of people copied his training methodology and went and trained with him and called it their own. He trained a lot of cops, but that's what he talked about, that exposure to all those repetitions of sight pictures, and it gave you a state of calm that the bad guy probably wouldn't have, so you could make good choices in bad moments.
Yeah. And, you know, and I got into a lot of physical confrontations on the job too. And I can tell you, the guys that train jujitsu and things, they do well at that. For normal earth people to possess those skills, it's awesome. I will tell you though, avoidance is good, because I can't tell you the number of dudes I got to jail and they'd be like, "Are you Hep C positive?" Yes. Oh, and
Mm-hmm.
I've got X, Y, and Z and scabies, and what's crawling on me? Oh, you got fleas too, and all kinds of
No joke.
bloodborne.
No
Yeah,
joke.
yeah. I tell people, I carry pepper spray every day because I don't want to touch people. I had to when I was on the job, but I don't. Man, there is nothing scarier than getting a phone call and saying, "Hey, did you get exposed to that guy's fluids?" I'm like, why? Oh, well, he just popped hot for tuberculosis at the jail, and you're going, oh God.
Right, right,
Um,
right, 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 right. Yeah,
yeah. And I mean,
that's legitimate. And people talk about, why doesn't somebody just beat that guy up? Like, just because you want to doesn't mean you should. Yeah. That's,
yeah. And, the different normal earth people, they're probably not going to get the phone call that the hospital just called us and told you this guy was HIV positive. Like, we got to run a blood test on you, or, hey, were you exposed to any, whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're going to get in a fight and the cops are going to come break it up. And 6 years later, when you don't feel so well, you're going to wonder, I mean, there's a lot of nasty stuff out there, man. Um, and I would say overwhelmingly, the number of people that are in the mental state that you're going to get involved in that conflict are probably not people like you and I that, you know, eat normal meals and have like values and ethics and hygiene.
Mhm.
So, take that for what it's worth.
That's valuable stuff. I
Yeah, or
think,
that. Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh,
No, you.
I was going to say, or the number of people I've pulled a needle off of, you
Hiding
know.
like in their pockets and stuff.
And you know, I've had friends that got a needle stick.
And
That's
that's
imagine
scary.
rolling around in the snow in Washington and getting a terminal illness because of your efforts. I wouldn't
No,
wish that on
I'm
anybody.
very well aware of that stuff. That's what I said to one of the passengers in the car. I said I just wasn't interested in touching somebody like some homeless crackhead that's sucking dick under the bridge for beer
Beer
money.
money.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not interested. So full circle. Uh, EDC Belt Company, edcbeltco.com. Is that how
Yeah.
people buy those belts? And that's my go-to belt. I recommend them. We keep some on the trailer to sell to students when they show up with inferior belts. How do people get them?
So edcbeltco.com, and Langdon Tactical is still carrying them. That's the two premier places, unless you're training with Mick and you show up with a shit show for a belt, then
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we
few
don't
on the
sell them on the
trailer.
website or anything, but we keep a dozen of them on hand. Just food for thought. You order them about 2 inches bigger than your pant size usually.
That's kind of a good general rule. Like, I wear a 36 pant, and I wear a 38 belt, but they're the other thing I tell people, ours are sized a little different. Like, when they are fully cinched, all the way buckle meets the Velcro, that's the true inch size of the belt. And instead of, like, the middle hole is the measurement for, a leather belt or whatever. But it is true size when it is fully closed. So, and I haven't had a whole lot of sizing issues, like with people returning them for size, um, because a lot of people go, well, I wear a 38 belt normally. So now you put a gun on and you lose about 2 inches of belt on top of that. Um, So yeah, you just go up one size from your normal pant size unless you're lying to yourself, right? Because I've seen people that that like tiny waisted dude with like a size 30 and just refuses to buy a size 34 belt when they put their you know whatever special Gucci holster with 4 magazine, their USPSA undergarment kit or whatever it is. And then they call me and go, it doesn't fit. And I'm like, well, what are you wearing? Well, I'm wearing this with a Surefire that and a Mod Light this and 4 magazines with stendo pads. I'm like,
And
sorry,
a
dude.
tourniquet, and a canteen, and a pup tent. Yep, yep.
Yeah.
And then
Emergency backup generator, whatever.
how do folks find your training courses again?
AmericanFightingRevolver.com. Just go sign up for the newsletter. I try to get a newsletter out every Wednesday. I've got a mass email system that sends them out every Wednesday, and it's like, hey, these are, it'll have a picture of from one of the articles that we've done on a historical gun, or and then in the bottom it says upcoming events, and it's all the where we're going to be with who, when, and where,
I
all
want to
that
get to
good.
one of those classes very bad. I want to come do it, so I'm going to have to take a look at that. I
Well, we
appreciate it.
we are midstream in planning a revolver, uh, like an East Coast revolver roundup. We're going to call it the Snub Roundup because it's going to be kind of snub centric for South Carolina in August. A lot of guys, the
Because
original.
South Carolina's got lovely weather in August.
Yeah, but it's kind of the only time we can get in there, and I got assured that there's plenty of shade and water.
Are you
Uh,
guys planning to go to a specific spot? Are you going to see Dutch Moyer maybe?
Yeah, that's the plan right now is Dutch in the sawmill facility. I've got to
Mm-hmm.
get a phone call in with them tomorrow to final hammer out all the details. The sales link will be on AmericanFightingRevolver.com. We'll have a landing page there. It's just not live yet because we haven't. Yeah, I never like to be a guest at somebody's facility and go, oh, and by the way, we've already got the sales link live. That's kind of a crappy thing to do, right? Before you make sure everything is all the details are ironed out. So I got to call in with them tomorrow, but it'll be August. I think it's 3rd, 4th, which is like Saturday, Sunday, and or yeah. So I've got to get that up, and
I'll have to check it out.
then it'll be a 2-day mini. So it'll be me, Chuck Haggard, Wayne Dobbs, and Daryl Bulkey, and it'll be kind of a round robin, depending on how many people we get. If you only get like 30 people, it may just be 3 instructors, um, but a lot like gun sight that weekend before Christmas from I-35 West, we don't have a problem really getting people there. You know what I mean? Like that corridor of the country, that gun sight trip isn't like a bridge too far the week before Thanksgiving. But you go east of I-35, there's a lot of dudes in that area that are like, man, I wish I could do it, but the logistics of going to gun sight and getting back to
Yeah,
help mama get ready for Thanksgiving is a little tall order. So we're going to try and grow
you
an
need to
East
make better
Coast,
choices and tell mom, figure it out.
yeah, DoorDash.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But
Exactly. Do your shopping ahead of time, women. I'm just
but
joking, but don't freak out.
yeah, AmericanFightingRevolver.com. Um, that's where we're at, and the website is still under development. There's still some stuff, but if you're a paying member, we've got a live chat feature back in there, so dudes can exchange gun ideas and like we're working on different chat plugins and things like that. So you don't have to worry about, hey, I just shared this load data and Jim Bob over here blew his gun up, on the public side. Um, and then we're publishing a video article a week it's Daryl and I talking about I'll spoil it. We've got two 1926 Wolf and Clark third model hand ejector 44 specials, his and
Wow.
mine, and we go over it. We clip in like high quality photos of it and document a little history, when they shipped, what configurations they were, things like that. Because I'll be real honest, like I didn't really even know what one was. I just bought it in a gun shop because it was like, okay, well, that's a pre-war Smith. That seems to be priced a little under. And then I get it home and I'm like, oh my God, I just struck gold. So it's becoming an online resource for people that go, they're real hardcore revolver aficionados. They look at it just to, hey, what features does that dude's gun have? The people that are like enthusiasts that are looking at collecting, it's a resource for them to go. They can go into their local gun shop and know, oh, that one hadn't been barrel swapped or chopped, or oh, it's got that checkering pattern. Maybe Frank Packmeyer worked on it,
Ooh.
So doing historical deep dives, and then we do everything from like, hey, this is what I carry every day, and this is the holster I carry it in, or this is our training methodology. And Daryl just moved to Oklahoma. He moved about 30 minutes south of me, so we'll be able to produce some like training snippets. And on Mondays, I do what's called Maintenance Monday, and I put a camera over my shoulder and I disassemble a piece of a revolver and talk about how to service it. So
That's cool.
yeah, I actually enjoy it. There are some things that I've covered, like using Renaissance wax on a gun, like how to apply it, and how to preserve your gun with it without getting fingerprints and stains and all that crap. Man, it went like wildfire. People were like, I didn't know you could do that. And these are some like long-standing revolver dudes. So did one on like chamfering chambers. Like, if you want to do it at home, here's the kit, and here's how you do it, and here's how you don't screw it up. And so it's just growing more and more and more, and more of a resource. So
I dig it. I'm going to have to go sign up. $5 a month.
Yeah, it's $60 a year. With my paywall program, it won't let me do an annual membership until I've got like a year's worth of history with it. But and the bulk of that money gets driven right back to the people that subscribe. I don't like we're not cutting you a check back, but you come see us at SHOT Show or something. I've always got some little piece of swag that costs about double what a monthly membership does. Just for me, it cost. We're also making the landing page where there's a lot of products in the industry that we carry, us hardcore gun dudes do, that other people are just unaware of. And we're in negotiation with some vendors right now to, hey, let us put up a sales spot on our website so that our revolver loving brethren can go to one location and purchase it.
Mm-hmm.
More to follow on that stuff, but that helps us do things like the Lipsies deal.
Yeah.
You guys covered our travel. Thanks. Like, we didn't have to go into the old broke pension fund to get there and help release the coolest revolver of 2024, So it's kind of an investment in that sounds terrible. That sounds like a liberal talking point.
You sound like a politician.
It's like an investment in the revolver community. But and let's face it, man, like a lot of the print ads or the print publications, they're struggling. People want to be able to read it on their phone,
Mm-hmm.
So
I dig it. I appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Yeah, man, I didn't realize it's been 2 hours, but
I know. I just saw what time it is, and I said, I'm going to cut this baby off because we could keep going. I dig it. I look forward to talking with you again. You guys that have listened, I hope you enjoyed it, got something out of it. We covered a lot of ground. Check out those couple of websites that we talked about, and maybe I'll see you at one of Bryan's events. Be well. Don't be dickheads. Drink some good coffee. Ignis Lux, one last plug. Why not?
It's good stuff, man.
You like it? We should go ahead.
Yeah, I like it. That I have. I was moving this last month, so I haven't reordered because I didn't know what my coffee making situation was going to be.
I know you guys were moving out there.
Visit our website, carrytrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., Carry Trainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@carrytrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@carrytrainer.com or carrytrainer.com. Oh, that's so nice and toasty. Chilly winter day. Hey, want to make sure that you guys know that this episode of the Higher Line podcast has been brought to you by Ignis Lux Coffee. Ignis Lux, Latin for firelight. A reminder to let your fire burn bright. We are only here but for a little while, and there's no sense in drinking crummy coffee when there's coffee like this available. Small batch roasted in fluid bed roasters. Check that out. Less than 1% of all the coffee in the world is done in fluid bed roasters. Why? Because it's more work, but it gives you a much better product. IgnisLuxCoffee.com. Roasted fresh, sent right to your door. Check it out.